Okay, so today we're continuing with chapter 24, the post-war period. Um, Last time I talked about abstract expressionism and pop art, and today I'm going to talk about sort of another kind of pop art, sort of pop art point 2.0, you could say, and uh, and then I'm going to talk about minimalism and land art. So those are the topics for today, all part of post-war period leading up to what we call the postmodern period, but really kind of laying the groundwork for the postmodern period and what we know as contemporary art now. Okay, but before I share my screen, hold on a second. I also want to say that the exam module will be present in the content by the time this video is uploaded. So, um, and it has two things in it, the exam module. It has a PowerPoint with some slides, and it has a Word document with some essay questions that go with the slides. So you just print out the Word document with the questions on it, and you look at the slides, and you write a little essay about each slide. And last time when people took the midterm, it's the same format as the midterm test. Several people plagiarized on the midterm. Don't do it. Just don't do it. You can refer to your notes, to the text, to my lectures, to anything in the content. You can research on the internet if you want to, but if you do that, don't just cut and paste. Duh. The other thing that people did was they took a sentence from the internet, cut it and pasted it into their exam. And then they just, changed a few words here and there. That's still plagiarism. You can't just change the tense of the verb, make it past tense instead of present tense, or change one or two words in somebody else's sentence and say you wrote the sentence. You didn't write the sentence. So I want to hear your voice. And if you absolutely can't say it, whatever it is you want to say, and you want to quote, that's okay, but you can only quote 3 times in the whole exam. Like the whole thing can't just be quotes. That goes for any type of research paper or anything else you write. You have to kind of limit your quotes. Save that for when you really need it. So you can quote, but you should put the quote in quotation marks, and you should include the source of the quote in parentheses after the quote. In other words, you don't have to do the whole MLA format thing, really. Just acknowledge this came from Wikipedia, or this came from the text, or this came from the lecture notes in the PDF, wherever you got it. Now, my lecture notes, eventually I started writing down, if I put a quote in the lecture notes in the PowerPoint, I started putting where it came from. But sometimes I didn't when I was first making those lectures. I didn't always, because the notes were just for me. So I didn't think it was important to put where I got them or anything like that. But so if it doesn't have a source, you should just put lecture notes in parentheses or something like that. If it has a source and it tells who wrote this sentence, just say Hal Foster or Rosalind Krauss, whoever I quoted in the lecture notes. So when I first started creating these lectures in PowerPoint, I didn't anticipate that I would be uploading the PDF of the lecture to the content. So I didn't think anybody else would see my notes. But now people are kind of studying my notes, and that's good. But if you use them as a source for your own writing, you know, say that it came from the lecture notes, or if I give a source, you can say that source, you know. Like sometimes it's the artists themselves. Today I have some quotes from Donald Judd, Rauschenberg, people like that, Walter DeMaria. So sometimes it's the artists themselves that said whatever I put in the notes. Okay, so if you have any questions about how to do the exam or what plagiarism is, you can email me, and if we need to have a phone conversation about it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it on the phone. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. Oops, wrong one. Where is it? That's not it. Here it is. Okay. All right. They've changed. PowerPoint is a little different than it used to be. I got a new computer. I had to upgrade my PowerPoint. Okay, so I'll just sort of run through a few of the slides from last time just to review. Okay, so post-war American art, we talked about Jackson Pollock, abstract expressionism, and de Kooning, abstract expressionism, Helen Frankenthaler, abstract expressionism. Then we went on to pop art, a different style, and we talked about Andy Warhol and mainly the Maryland diptych, but we also talked about this work, another work in another silk screen grid kind of thing. We talked about how Warhol's work is kind of about American consumerism, you could say. All right, so now we're still in the 1950s. And we're going to talk about two artists who worked together very closely in the 1950s, sort of like Picasso and Braque were working together in 1910 to invent Cubism. Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg were close friends. They lived in the same building, I think. And eventually, they were both gay, and eventually they were a couple. And then they had a kind of very public breakup. But they also looked at each other's work and talked about it all the time. So they were kind of reacting against abstract expressionism. So neither one of them liked it. It was the dominant style of this time, the 1950s. Pollock died, I think, in sometime in the mid 1950s, but his paintings were, you know, worth millions of dollars. And so abstract expressionism was the dominant style of this period, but Rauschenberg and Johns kind of reacted against that. And this is what Rauschenberg said. We'll get to Rauschenberg in a minute. He said that you have to have time to feel sorry for yourself to be a good abstract expressionist. I love that. You know, abstract expressionism was all about angst, your personal angst, you know, and it was supposed to come out on the canvas in your sad, out of your sad space inside your mind onto the canvas, all your conflicts, all your repressed aggression and lust and anger was supposed to come out on the canvas. And Rauschenberg was just like, meh, I don't want to do that. And neither did Johns. Okay, so and you could see, okay, this painting is called Flag. He did a whole series of paintings, you could say, about the American flag, but it's not, well, what critics have asked ever since is this a flag or is it a painting of a flag? Because it's not a painting of a flag sort of waving in the breeze, you know, on a flagpole. It's not that. It's just, he took the image of the flag, the sort of graphic image of the American flag, the design of it, and painted it on a canvas. Now, you may know, have already noticed that when Johns did this, there were only 48 states. So in the mid 1950s. So Alaska and Hawaii had not yet joined the Union. They were like territories or something that weren't full-fledged states. I'm not exactly what that year they joined the Union, but it was later. And then all the stars had to be rearranged. It worked great when there were only 48 states. It made a nice little grid, you know. So he pretty much copied the American flag exactly, but in a medium that we'd already talked about, and that is encaustic. Okay, so as you may remember, encaustic is melted wax with some pigment in it. And he actually, let me just go ahead a little bit. All right, so if you get close to this, you can see that he layered underneath the transparent wax, which has some pigment in it, some oil pigment in it, there is newspaper. So he had put down strips of newspaper and kind of, you could say, collaged them onto this canvas using the encaustic as a kind of glue. And that when I saw this in person, I realized, I mean, when you look at this, you think it's kind of like, you don't realize there's these really hard edges between the stripes and between the square and the rest of the stripes, but they are, because of the way he layered on. It's just, there's like a little gap there almost. So it's not really a black line. It's just like the newspaper comes up to there, and then this other newspaper comes down to there. So you can kind of almost read some of the text underneath, which is kind of interesting because it makes it seem like layers and layers of American history. And there's a video in the content where Sal Khan, the Khan Academy founder, and one of the art historians discuss this painting, which is pretty famous. I mean, Sal Khan says that it was on the cover of his American history textbook when he was in high school. And that wouldn't surprise me. I've seen t-shirts with this on it. So this is what Hal Foster says about this. It preserved the model of painting as represented by Jackson Pollock. That is gestural painting that's on there thick. You know, Pollock's paintings have a lot of texture. The paint is on there pretty thick in places, and there's kind of layers of skeins of paint and so on. And the same thing is going on here. The paint is very visible. It's not fan brushed so that you don't notice the paint. The brush strokes are visible, but it's not all about Jasper John's feelings. It's about a symbol. So all that paint, that sort of expressive painting of Pollock, is in a tense suspension with its avant-gardist opposite, as represented by Duchamp. Remember, Marcel Duchamp was the guy who sort of invented the ready-made. That is, go to a hardware store, buy a urinal, paint your name on it, call it art. So it's, you know, the flag is kind of a ready-made. You can buy one in a hardware store. So he's taking something that's already familiar to people. As Johns put it, things the mind already knows, or things seen but not looked at. And really, I have to say, this did make me think about just the formal qualities of the American flag more. Like, it's a pretty brilliant design, really. It's a good design. Now, if somebody asked you to replicate an American flag without looking at one, some people would have trouble. And the way I know this is that my neighbor Jerry, right after 9/11, he wanted a flag, but he couldn't find a flag. I guess they were all sold already or something. So he decided to paint an American flag on a pillowcase, just with some paint that he had in his shop, his garage. And he painted it wrong. he, I mean, it was okay. I thought it was great, but it wasn't like an American flag. He painted like a red stripe and then a white stripe and then a blue stripe and then a white stripe, red stripe, white stripe, blue stripe. So he alternated white stripes the way you're supposed to, but instead of all red stripes, he had red and blue stripes. And he just kind of phoned in the stars, really. He knew there was supposed to be a blue background, and he did paint the stars in white, but he just kind of, and I don't think he put all 50 of them in. They were just supposed to stand for the stars or something. So it was kind of a homemade flag, and he just forgot that the stripes are red and white, not red, white, and blue. But fine, whatever. I photographed that flag a lot because I liked it. It was a kind of folk art flag. Okay, so let's talk about Rauschenberg, Johns' friend. Okay, so this is called Bed, and it's in the Museum of Modern Art, and I've seen it and in person, and it's impressive. Okay, so it's mounted vertically on the wall, right? But it makes a sort of reference to Pollock's paintings again, because Pollock, it looks abstract expressionist up here, the top part, right? So what it is an actual quilt in a frame with an actual pillow and an actual sheet, and he just put paint on it. I think he put some gesso first, some primer on it first. In fact, yeah. So it references abstract expressionism in that there are drips, right? But the drips show that he painted it vertically, he didn't, I mean, a bed is horizontal, right? It's a kind of funny inversion of Pollock's painting, where Pollock took a painting that would normally be painted on an easel vertically, and he put it on the floor and dripped paint on it horizontally. So that was his trick, his shtick, you could say. So Rauschenberg has done the opposite. He's taken something that's normally horizontal, like a bed, and flipped it up and started painting it. So you can see the drips here are going down. Gravity is pulling them down. So you know he painted it up while it was upright. So when I was in graduate school, one of my teachers was very, very deeply moved by this bed. She said it made her cry when she saw it. And that's kind of hilarious because it's actually meant as a joke. She didn't get the joke, I guess. But that's fine. I mean, people have different interpretations of art. And if it makes you cry when it's supposed to make you laugh, well, that's valid. So how do I know it's meant to be a joke? Well, I'm just more convinced by the explanation that the Khan Academy art historians give in their video, which is in the content, and you should watch it. So they're talking about it, and one of them says, you know how abstract expressionism was supposed to be all about the unconscious and the repressed aspects of yourself that come out, say, in dreams, and how painting was going to bring that out too, sort of as the surrealists hoped that it would. That is, the surrealists back in the 30s thought that art should, reflect the unconscious and dreams, not just the rational world. And abstract expressionism drew on surrealism in that way and said, yes, Pollock says, yes, this is all my unconscious conflicts coming out on the canvas. And Rauschenberg just thought that was a bunch of BS. So he says, this is my bed. This is where I have all those dreams that you're talking about. And so I'm going to go you one better. I'm not just going to put a canvas on the floor and hope that my dreams come out on the canvas. I'm going to show you my actual bed where these dreams supposedly happen. And here's what I think is also kind of funny about it. The top part of the painting is this mess. It's like the classic abstract expressionist mess of the repressed unconscious. But down here, there's this very rigid kind of grid right? From the quilt, the log cabin pattern, actually. Once I made a quilt with using that pattern, probably 40 years ago. So this is a very geometrical grid down here. It's very rational. And up here, it's all about the unconscious, the irrationality of the unconscious mind or whatever. And the bed's kind of messy up here. But down here, it's all tucked in, it's all straight, you know. So what does that mean? I don't know. But I just think that contrast is kind of interesting. So a lot of times Johns and Rauschenberg are put in a category of contemporary and, you know, post-war art called neo-Dada. That is, they're using some of the strategies of Dada, like the ready-made object or the found object, and kind of reviving that tradition and using it in a new way. So Rauschenberg actually called his assemblages, these sort of things that he made out of things that he had found and painted and so on, he called them combines. So they were three-dimensional, so they were sort of sculpture and sort of painting. And in that sense, that's why they were combines. You know, they were a little different than Duchamp's ready-mades, which generally didn't, even if there were two different things, like a stool and a bicycle wheel, he didn't usually paint on his sculptures, except when he wrote Armut on the urinal. But Rauschenberg did. He did a lot of painting on these objects that he found. And this is the one that I love the most. And I saw it when I first moved to Houston in 1998. By great good luck, there was a huge Rauschenberg retrospective in Houston that was spread out over 3 or 4 museums in Houston. So you had to see all the stuff. You had to go to these 3 or 4 museums because there was a lot of stuff. And they were all these combines mostly. There were some prints and other things, but a lot of it were these combines that, or so Rauschenberg called them. Okay, so this is the one that I thought was the funniest and really the most thought-provoking. And it, you know, as you can see, it's a mohair goat. This is the kind of goat that's cultivated for its fur, not for its milk, or I should say for its wool. And mohair goats have these very long locks of silky wool. And then it's got a tire around it, and it's standing on a platform with various painted and collaged elements on the platform. So it's when we talk about three-dimensional art like this, it's kind of hard to experience it in a slide without walking around it. So I've added some slides so you can see. Okay, so when you look down on it, you know, it's well, actually these are called Angora goats, even though the wool is called mohair. That's kind of confusing. So this is if you were sort of about 10 feet in the air looking down on this thing. And then there's a slide of it from the rear. And this is the best. I didn't really notice this until today, but there's a little tennis ball there. That's obviously sort of meant to be a turd or a dropping of some sort. Okay, so, and interestingly, it's called monogram. So let's just think about what is a monogram. A monogram is your initials inside of a circle, right? People used to have monograms on their sweaters. Sometimes they have them on their backpacks. I've even seen them on the back of the spare tire on a Jeep. So Rauschenberg is essentially saying, this is me, you know, and that's another part of the joke, which I'll explain in a minute. I'll sort of explain. I'm not going to give the joke away completely. Now, another thing, okay, here's the story behind how this came about. Rauschenberg lived in New York. This was when artists could actually afford to live in New York. He lived in Lower Manhattan, where there were these large lofts or sort of warehouse spaces that artists could rent for pretty cheap. So he and a lot of his friends lived downtown in this part of Manhattan. And he would go out on the street and scavenge, you know, things off the street junk that people left to be hauled away as trash or whatever. But actually he saw this in the window of a like an office supply store, and he just fell in love with this goat. And he asked the owner of the store if he could buy it, and the owner said, "Yeah, well, I can't let you have it for less than $35," which is sort of a lot in 1955. And he said, "Well, I've only got 15 with me." So he gave him, the owner of the store, $15, and the guy let him take it home. But he was going to come back and pay the balance, $20. But by the time he came back, the office supply store had closed. So he got this goat for 15 bucks. Bucks. Get it? All right. So he took it home and he started messing around with it. It took him 4 years to get this piece right. And I think that's important because he didn't just slap it together. He thought about it a lot. All right. So first he had the goat on like a little shelf in front of a painting. A painting with some collage elements on it. Remember, by this time, everybody knew that Picasso and Braque had invented synthetic cubism, which involved, gluing paper, cloth, newspaper to canvases. So that was normal to do that. So he had this wooden panel that he had painted and collaged and so on. And the goat was just standing on a little shelf in front of it. And he was like, "No, that's not it." So next he put the goat sort of in front of a panel that had various paintings sort of collaged and painted onto it. But then he said it looked too much like the goat was pulling it, like it was his job to pull it like a cart. In which case it would be another example of gift for Apollo, right? Wait, Rauschenberg did do a gift for Apollo, but it didn't involve the goat. Okay. So then he made a bunch of drawings that included measurements and, trying to figure out exactly where the goat would go on this platform. And he finally arrived at, well, it looks like it's a hinged platform. Another thing I hadn't noticed before. Probably, he's always getting doors and things to use in his work. So maybe that's why. And then it's mounted on casters. That is, things that you can roll around. And then he puts a little tennis ball there, like a little turd. Okay, now here's what Robert Hughes, who's an art critic, thinks. Here's what he has to say about what this sculpture is about and what it means. He says, "Goats are the oldest metaphors of priapic energy." So I'm going to let you look up that word, priapic. I'm not going to tell you what it means because that'll be explaining the joke too much. This one, with its paint smudged, thrusting head and its body stuck halfway through the encircling tire, is one of the few great icons of male homosexual love in modern culture. So I'm just going to leave that there, as people say, and let you kind of contemplate it. All right, so now we're going on to minimalism. But this is not a minimalist sculpture, obviously, because you remember the minimalist sculptures were the Donald Judd concrete boxes and so on. All right, but to understand those boxes and their sort of place in all art history, we kind of have to go back. Oh, and this is wrong. It should have said 1856. I'll fix that later. You make a note to fix that. Okay, so we have to go back 100 years to the traditional sort of role of sculpture, which is to commemorate a famous person, a man, almost always, some kind of ruler or general. And that's traditional on equestrian sculptures, right? An equestrian sculpture is a man mounted on a horse who won a battle, or was a king, or a Caesar or something. In this case, it's Andrew Jackson. We don't have kings here, but he was president of the United States in the 1830s, I think. But And this is in New Orleans. It's in Jackson Square in New Orleans. And the reason it's in New Orleans might be kind of obvious if you remember the Johnny Horton song. In 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we met the bloody British at the town of New Orleans. Okay, so that's a song that was popular about the Battle of New Orleans, which happened in 1814. And it was part of a war between, I can't explain the War of 1812. You can look that up if you want to. Anyway, the Battle of New Orleans is a big deal. And Andrew Jackson was the hero of that battle, where they ran through the briars and they ran through the bushes and they ran through the briars where a rabbit couldn't go. So in other words, the British ran away and American forces prevailed over the redcoats. They lost their pants and their pretty shiny coats, and their tails were all showing like a bunch of billy goats. So Andrew Jackson and some other people from Tennessee kind of prevailed over the British troops and won the Battle of New Orleans. So that's the reason there's this statue of Andrew Jackson in Jackson Square, near Jackson Square. Okay, but in the 20th century, sculpture became autonomous. That is, Brancusi's Bird in Space doesn't depend on where it is for its meaning. In other words, Andrew Jackson's sculpture in Jackson Square in New Orleans derives a lot of its meaning from where it's placed, because it's about the Battle of New Orleans, so on. But Brancusi's Bird in Space means the same thing, whatever it means, whether it's on your coffee table or in the Museum of Modern Art. So it doesn't derive meaning from its surroundings. So that was one aspect of modernism, that art was supposed to be autonomous from its surroundings, as it were. But by the 1960s, sculptors were questioning that whole idea that sculpture could ever truly be autonomous, that is, viewed in isolation from the space that it's in. And Donald Judd probably is the person who thought about this the most, along with some of the other sculptors who were part of an art movement called Minimalism, which we've already talked about a little bit. So this is probably my least favorite Donald Judd sculpture. I mean, it's in a museum. And later he figured out that his work didn't really work in museums. And I think you can see that. This is boring. I mean, about all you can say for it that's interesting is that it's made out of industrial materials, which was kind of a new thing at the time. It's not made out of marble or a usual fine art materials. It's made out of glass and aluminum and or steel, the same materials that modern office buildings are made out of. Now, the one thing that I find slightly interesting about it, but only slightly, is that one of the things that Donald Judd kind of hated was Renaissance illusionism. That is, the idea of 1-point linear perspective, 2-point linear perspective, all that stuff. He thought it was just stupid. And I'll quote some of his writing in a minute when we get to the concrete boxes again. But this does it's sort of about that, like when you learn how to draw something in perspective, you learn how to draw something looking down on it, as you would be looking at this, looking straight on at it and looking up at it. So this is the proverbial box in the desert that I use when I'm talking about linear perspective and I'm drawing on the whiteboard, but from different viewpoints. And I guess that makes a little point. Like, this thing is repeated however many times, 10 times, but it looks different from different points of view. Duh. All right. So he did sort of take that idea and run with it. And thus we have the 15 untitled works in concrete in Marfa. Texas, where this becomes much more obvious. I feel like, and it's successful, you could say. So the thing about minimalism is that, and how it's different from either modernist sculpture like Brancusi's Bird in Space, or the statue of Andrew, or well, it's sort of more like the statue of Andrew Jackson than Brancusi's Bird in Space, right? It goes back to that idea that sculpture is, the meaning of a sculpture is dependent on where it is. But it's not, minimalist sculpture doesn't tell you a story. Like the Andrew Jackson sculpture kind of references the story of the Battle of New Orleans, and you're supposed to think about that when you see that, and think about Andrew Jackson, the historical person. But minimalism doesn't have a story at all. It eschews narrative completely. As one minimalist said, I'm not sure which one, what you see is what you see. That's all there is to it. It seems like kind of nothing because, as another critic put it, it's just not all that into you. It's not flirting with you at all or trying to seduce you by how beautiful it is. It can be beautiful, but you have to sort of stay with it for a while to see that. So there's no story, there's no message or quote unquote meaning, but there kind of is. All right. So what is the meaning? The meaning has to do with a couple of things. One is the materials that are being used, in this case, concrete, industrial materials. And once you see art like this that's made out of industrial materials, and then you go back to looking at an industrial culvert, like a concrete pipe for a culvert or something, you don't see those concrete pipes the same anymore. Like for a long time, there was a big pile of them right across from the Czech campus. And to me, they look like a Donald Judd artwork. I don't know if they're still there. They may have already installed those pipes. But next time you drive by there, if you see those pipes, if they're still there, you'll see what I mean. It also makes those shipping crates look different, the kind that are on the back of a truck and then are loaded onto a ship. Those big boxes look different. It even makes a big box store look kind of different to me. I mean, you realize how much of a big box store really is. And why are they boxes? Why aren't they like cones or prisms of another sort, or cylinders? I mean, they're always a box. I guess that's just the easiest way to build them. So so that's one meaning, just the materials. And we'll get to some quotes in a minute that Donald Judd had about that. But the other meaning is that walking around and experiencing these concrete boxes in their natural habitat, as it were, it really, the site really has a lot to do with it. Like I think I told you earlier in the course that when I was there were pronghorns jumping around. It's very dry. The grass kind of crackles when you're walking around. I've been there both in the summer and in the winter. In the summer, it's really hot, and you want to get in the boxes to get some shade, and you can. They're outside, so you can touch them. And in the winter, they seem like shelter. Little houses almost. And then looking through the boxes frames the view differently depending on where you're standing. And you start to see the boxes as kind of like frames. I mean, what is art but something within a frame, right? But this is the frame itself. So this is what Judd says. 3 dimensions are real space. That gets rid of the problem of illusionism, one of the most objectionable relics of European art. In other words, he didn't like the fact that Renaissance art was based on learning to create the illusion of real space, on 3-dimensional space, on a two-dimensional surface. That's what you learned if you were classically trained at the academy in France or in Rome. You learned how to do Renaissance perspective, so you could create this fake window onto reality. And modernism was all about 20th century modernism was all about exposing that as a barefaced lie. So I think it's kind of hard to understand now why that was so offensive to modernists, because now we're just like, yeah, we know it's fake. We don't care. I mean, I don't care. I'm interested in linear perspective. I can't really do it very well yet, but I'm learning. And I want to be able to create an imaginary space in 2 dimensions. I mean, it's exciting to me. But for most of the 20th century, that was considered incredibly retro, like not avant-garde at all, and definitely to Judd. And, as a result, he made some very nice things. So he says, actual space, that is the space you're standing in, is more intrinsically powerful and specific than paint on a flat surface. So he loved this word specific. Not really sure why, but he called these things specific objects. Everything he made was a specific object. Okay, and he says, most of my work involves new materials, things not used before in art, like concrete. Little was done until lately with the wide range of industrial products, formica, aluminum, steel, plexiglass, and so on. They are specific. If they are used directly, they are more specific. This is very vague. Who knows what he meant by specific? And also, they're usually aggressive. All right, we know what that means. There's an objectivity to the obdurate identity of a material. That is, you can't get away from this being concrete. Like, he hasn't plastered over it to make it look like stone or something else. He's just like, nope, this is concrete. If you built a house like this, your builder would probably say, look, you can't just have a concrete facade. You have to put some stone or brick or something. But if you're Donald Judd, you can just say, no, this is how I want it to be honest. I want it to be real. I want people to see what it's made out of. And there were parallels to this in architecture at the time, and before, even way before the 80s. We didn't really talk about architecture, but that whole idea that buildings form should follow function, and the materials that a building is made out of should be obvious. That was a thing in architecture. Okay, now when I was talking about Donald Judd earlier in this class, I didn't talk about the untitled works in mill aluminum, but these are unabashedly beautiful. I mean, you could argue that the concrete boxes are, some people think they're beautiful. I do, after I spend enough time with them. But these are the boxes made out of aluminum just knock your socks off. And it's mainly because of where they are. They're in this, okay, so Judd, with the help of the Dia Foundation, bought this tract of land where there had been kind of like an army base there in Marfa, but it was deserted. So these very wealthy people whose money came mainly from oil, the Menil family, some of the people in Houston, some of the people in the Menil family had formed a foundation called the Dia Foundation. And so one of the Menil children who had inherited vast wealth got interested in Judd's work and started funding his projects. And so together they bought this army base in Marfa, Texas, and converted these artillery sheds into spectacular gallery spaces. So there were sliding doors over here, I think, like garage doors, and they replaced those with glass. So all this light, and the light in West Texas is very intense most of the year, came pouring in the glass, and these surfaces are reflective. And then there's this beautiful concrete floor, which has been kind of buffed and waxed and everything. And so the reflections from the floor and from the sky outside at different times of day create this amazing play of light and shapes and colors on these boxes. And when you walk by them, your own reflection moves past. It's fascinating to photograph. I did photograph it when I was there, but I can't find those photographs right now. They won't let you bring a tripod in here. I was using a very early digital point and shoot, which wasn't great. But I think you can see from this slide the way in which the boxes reflect whatever's going on outside, especially here. You can see that the incredible blue of the sky just lands on the top of this box and even on the underside of the box. So each of these boxes have the same exact dimensions. They're all 41 inches by 51 inches by 72 inches. But the way they're kind of configured is different. And there's no two that are exactly alike. He sort of broke up the boxes in different ways, like sometimes put some aluminum diagonally on the inside of the box, or sometimes they look like little desks. You can come in with shelves, but it's just fascinating to see all the ways in which he managed to configure the boxes. And of course, he didn't make them with his own little hands. He had them made like he did the concrete boxes, which also are arranged in every possible way you can think of. Okay, so we could talk about that for hours, but I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is land art. Okay, so this is 1970, and artists, like most thoughtful people in America, this is the height of the Vietnam War era. And, I think that 1970 was one of the years where there were the most casualties of American soldiers in Vietnam. So it was a pretty bad year from that respect. And there was the anti-war movement was growing, civil rights movement was in full swing. And so artists, like other avant-garde people, were thinking about, it's sort of like the period after World War I, you could say, in Europe, where Dada sort of reacted against World War I and the idiocy and waste of World War I. In a similar way, in the 1970s, artists were reacting to the waste and carnage of the Vietnam War when there was a draft. And, young men in particular had to think long and hard about whether they wanted to cooperate with the government that was drafting them to go to the complete other side of the world to kill people that we didn't have an obvious conflict with. I mean, the Vietnamese were tiny little Asian farmers. Why were we killing them? I still don't really know the answer. It had something to do with communism, Anyway, so people were also questioning the whole art world, like the world of galleries, museums, wealthy collectors. That whole world suddenly started to seem like part of the same world that was sending young American men to Asia, and where they just got blown up by landmines or injured by Agent Orange, or a lot of bad things happened. So artists started thinking, how can we make art that's not part of this institutionalized art world, that's not part of the world of wealthy collectors and museums and galleries? Well, let's just get it out of the gallery and let's make it something that can't be bought and sold easily. And by the way, let's make it something about environmental concerns, because those were environmentalism. The environmental movement was new. I think I showed you that photograph from the late 1960s of the Earth seen from space, Earthrise over the moon. I think that happened in 1968 or 69. But anyway, the environmental movement began around that time, and the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. And it's hard for people now to realize how filthy the air and water were in the late 60s. Famously, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught on fire because it had so much industrial waste in it. But anyway, artists were reacting to that. And so Robert Smithson had the idea of going to a pretty remote setting, that is the Great Salt Lake in Utah, and using dump trucks to put rocks into the Great Salt Lake in the shape of a spiral like this, the spiral jetty. So he hired these dump trucks, and they moved all these rocks out into the lake and made it into a spiral jetty. And then he hired a guy with an airplane to fly over the spiral jetty and photograph it. And it's really this photograph that became the work, you could say. In fact, some people have questioned whether Smithson made the work for the photograph, or if the photograph was about the work, or what. In this photograph, Spiral Jetty looks enormous compared to the mountains behind it. But when you're actually at Spiral Jetty, it doesn't seem as huge compared to the lake as this photograph made it look. I haven't been to Spiral Jetty. This is one on my bucket list. All right, so the thing about Smithson was interested in the concept of entropy, the way that things degrade or change over time. And he expected Spiral Jetty to change over time. And actually, it didn't take, Smithson died a couple of years after he made this in an airplane crash. But it did start to change almost immediately. For one thing, it was submerged for a while. And then there was a long drought, and the water receded completely from Spiral Jetty so that it was not in the lake anymore. It was just on sand, kind of. But then the water came back, and now I think it's more or less like it was when he built it. But the conditions in the lake change, and that changes the way you experience Spiral Jetty. He was inspired in part by the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio that was built by Native American pre-Columbian people, that is, people who were here before Columbus. And as you can see, they built a mound that in the shape of a snake, and at this end there's a snake's head that seems to be swallowing an egg or something. But the tail of the serpent inspired him. So I think this is more or less what Spiral Jetty looked like a few years ago. I have some friends who went to it. They live, their parents live in Utah, and they did go visit it. Okay, another piece of land art to think about is the lightning field. And this is in New Mexico. And again, this is one that I haven't seen yet, but it's something I really want to see. It's hard to see, though, because you have to make a reservation in February on the Dia Foundation website to see it sometime between May and October. That's when it's open. And the Dia Foundation, the same Dia Foundation that helped Donald Judd build his works in Marfa, they're very interested in land art now. So they take care of the Spiral Jetty and the lightning field. So the lightning field is 400 poles, approximately 20 feet tall, and they're laid out on a grid and each pole is 220 feet from each other pole, the other poles. Like this pole, you can see that they recede into the distance, and you can see that linear perspective is at work here, right? The orthogonal is, the vanishing point is right there, and these are the orthogonals. So this pole is 220 feet from this pole is 220 feet from this pole, and the same in this direction. So you're at one of the corners here of the grid. The grid is a mile long and a kilometer wide, apparently. Now, one of the things that's most interesting about the lightning field is that the ground looks level, but it's really not. It sort of undulates a little bit. But they laid it out so that the top of each of these poles is exactly level. So you could theoretically, you could have a huge sheet of glass that would sit on top of the lightning poles, and it would be level. I don't know how they did that. That seems like it'd be really, I guess they use surveying implements or something to figure out. I mean, these must be sunk into the ground, a good ways, because they're 20 feet tall. But somehow they're all exactly at the same. Maybe they just use string, like when you're making a fence. I don't know. But that's part of the concept, And supposedly, if you're there at the right time, there can be a lightning storm, and the lightning is going to hit those poles. So don't go out and touch them. So the way you experience the lightning field is you make this reservation like months in advance. Then you fly to Albuquerque, I think, and they pick you up in a Jeep and they drive you to the site blindfolded. No, just kidding about the blindfolded. But you can't go there by yourself. You can't just say, oh, let's go to the lightning field today. You have to go there under their auspices, and you have to stay there 24 hours. So you get dropped off at this cabin that can hold 6 people, and you stay in the cabin, and they've left some supper and breakfast for you there. And then they come back and get you the next evening. So you experience the site over a 24-hour period. And maybe there won't be a lightning storm. I mean, maybe allegedly during the middle of the day, when the sun is right overhead, the poles almost disappear. And I can believe that, because, when the sun is so bright on the Great Plains of the American West in the middle of the day in summer, that white objects sort of disappear, especially white vertical objects. I know because I've fallen over them. So I can believe that the poles kind of disappear, and then they reappear in the morning and evening. And if you're lucky, you'll see a lightning storm. All right. So DeMaria's whole theory about land art was the invisible is real. In other words, you can't actually see a glass plate laying across the tops of these poles, but that idea is still real. The math of the whole thing is still real. The fact that this is a grid where, the poles are exactly 220, the points on the grid are 220 feet this way and this way. The diagonal, obviously, is some other number. But all of that is real. Even the lightning that you might not see during your visit, it's real. It's there sometimes. And then the fact that it's so hard to get to, and that you have to make a sort of pilgrimage to get there, that too was important in DeMaria's point of view. Isolation is the essence of land art, he said. Now, this seems to go against this idea of a sort of, get art out of the galleries, get it to the people. Well, the people don't live. There are not many people that live out here. So in a way, this art exists only in photographs and sort of in the mind of people like us who've never been there. The idea exists for us, but, I may never get to the lightning field. I hope I do someday, but, it's going to take a lot of effort. So, to me, that's sort of bothersome, because it seems a little bit elitist, to be honest. And if we want to deinstitutionalize art and take the power of control over art away from elites, putting it way out in the middle of New Mexico and giving control over it to the Dia Foundation, the ultimate, oil billionaires, doesn't seem all that populous to me, but maybe that's just me. I don't know. All right. So I think I'm going to stop here. There's some other things we could talk about land art and things like that, but I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to stop my share. Okay. All right. So now there's no lecture on Wednesday of this week because this is the week of Thanksgiving. If you're watching this in the fall of 2020, this is Thanksgiving week. If you're watching it in spring of 21, it's not Thanksgiving week. But in any case, there's no, maybe I'll just end the lecture here. Or no, I'm not going to do that. All right. So there's no lecture on Wednesday, but you still need to submit a question. You can come in. You still need to submit a question about the lecture today. So since there's only one lecture, then your question will be about the lecture that we just did. So something about Rauschenberg, John's, minimalism, or land art, and put that in the Dropbox. And also, there won't be a discussion on Friday because there's no classes on Friday. And I'm sure you have other things to do on Friday, even if you can't go anywhere. I can't go anywhere. We decided to all stay home in my family. So, but you probably have things you would like to do on Friday. So it's a day off. Yay. All right. So just upload your question to the Dropbox about chapter 24. I'll go check and make sure that's really there. And check out the assignment about the exam. I need to put a due date on that. I just realized. Okay. I think I put a due date on the schedule, but I'll put it in the assignment as well. So it's like the first week in December. So it's not, you've got a couple of weeks, I guess. So if you have any questions about any of that, email me. And again, if we need to talk on the phone, that's fine. You can have my cell phone number and we'll talk on the phone. Okay, bye.